today, take a walk with me and come with me to an ancient time, about 1,000 years before Jesus was born. The Egyptian dynasties were in their full power, and the Middle Eastern and Persian and Babylonian empires were still forming. It was a brutal time. The small kingdoms in the Middle East were fighting for territory in wars that were bloody and protracted. And the nation of Israel, 13 small tribes, was trying to establish itself on a small piece of real estate. The Israelites had arrived as a nomadic people about 40 years before after about 40 years in the desert under a fearless leader, and they were a force to be reckoned with. And make no mistake about it, the way that they had taken over their land was by sheer force and brutality. They'd wiped out whole cities and tribes in their march northeast, and so naturally, they made enemies out of the people they had displaced. Oh, the lyrics are running on the screen. I'll stop that. I always forget to stop them because it's all automatic here, eh? Yeah. The Israelites had wiped out whole cities and tribes, and they had made enemies out of the people they had displaced. And they were particularly brutal to a group of people that were occupying their land, the land that they thought was theirs, called the Philistines. And they had an escalating series of battles that led to one final climactic clash. Now, stay with me, because on this day, about 1,000 years before Jesus, something extraordinary is happening. A young man by the name of David is walking onto a battlefield to face a 10-foot mammoth of a man. And all he's carrying with him is a shepherd's staff, a sling, and 5 smooth stones. Now, because this story exists so much in the zeitgeist of pop culture, it is easy to forget how intimidating it must have been to face Goliath. Goliath was covered in head to toe in bronze armor. He must have looked like a demigod standing there in his gleaming armor, all 126 pounds of it, you find when you read the story. He had the biggest sword anybody had ever seen. His spear shaft was like a fence rail. The tip of the spear of this terrifying javelin weighed 15 pounds. Can you imagine being struck by him? It would just tear you limb from limb. And the absurdity of it all is that on this day, David has no battle experience. He's not been on the front lines. He's never had to face the horrors of war. All he knows is the stories that his brothers have told him. He likes the battle stories, but he's never actually had to spill blood like his bigger, more impressive brothers. In fact, if you read the stories before this moment, you discover that David was overlooked. When a prophet came to his dad's house looking for the next king of Israel, his dad didn't even think to send for him. So, sending this young man onto the battlefield is a dumb idea. Allowing him to walk on without any armor is another dumb idea. It was David, actually. And the man he's facing is a legend. He's so intimidating that for 40 days, nobody has dared to step up to his challenge. Not the king, not David's bigger, faster, more impressive brothers. Nobody. You know the funny thing? David wasn't even supposed to be on the battlefield that day. He wasn't a member of the army. He was just a shepherd, and his dad had sent him to the front lines to bring food to his brothers. Let's read it together. 1 Samuel 17. David was up at the crack of dawn, and having arranged for somebody to take care of his flock, he took the food and was on his way just as Jesse had directed him. Jesse was his dad. He arrived at the camp just as the army was moving into battle formation, shouting the war cry. Israel and the Philistines moved into position, facing each other, battle ready. David left his bundles of food in the care of a sentry, ran to the troops who were gathered, and greeted his brothers. And while they were talking together, the Philistine champion, Goliath of Gath, stepped out from the front lines of the Philistines and gave his usual challenge. David heard him. The Israelites, to a man, fell back the moment they saw the giant, totally frightened. The talk among the troops was, have you ever seen anything like this? This man openly and defiantly challenging Israel. The man who kills this giant will have it made. The king will give him a huge reward, offer his daughter as a bride, and give his entire family a free ride. David, who was talking to the men around him, asked, "What's in it for the man who kills that Philistine and gets rid of this ugly blot on Israel's honor? Who does he think he is, anyway? This uncircumcised Philistine taunting the armies of God alive." They told him what everyone was saying about what the king would do for the man who killed the Philistine. Eliab, his older brother, heard David fraternizing with the men and lost his temper. "What are you doing here? Why aren't you minding your own business, tending that scrawny flock of sheep? I know what you're up to. You've come down here to see the sights, hoping for a ringside seat at a bloody battle." "What's it with you?" replied David. "All I did was ask a question." Ignoring his brother, he turned to someone else and asked the same question and got the same answer as before. The things that David was saying were picked up and reported to Saul, and Saul sent for him. "Master," said David, "don't give up hope. I'm ready to go and fight this Philistine." Saul answered David, "You can't go and fight this Philistine. You're too young and inexperienced, and he's been at this fighting business since before you were born." David said, "I've been a shepherd tending sheep for my father. Whenever a lion or a bear came and took a lamb from the flock, I'd go after it, knock it down, and rescue the lamb. If it turned on me, I'd grab it by the throat, wring its neck, and kill it. Lion or bear, it made no difference. I killed it. And I'll do the same to this Philistine pig who is taunting the troops of God alive. God, who delivered me from the teeth of the lion and the claws of the bear, will deliver me from this Philistine." Saul said, "Go, and God help you." Then Saul outfitted David as a soldier in his armor. He put his bronze helmet on his head and belted his sword on him over the armor. David tried to walk, but he could hardly budge. David told Saul, "I can't even move with all this stuff on me. I'm not used to this." And he took it all off. Then David took his shepherd's staff, selected 5 smooth stones from the brook, and put them in the pocket of his shepherd's pack, and with his sling in hand approached Goliath. As the Philistine paced back and forth, his shield bearer in front of him, he noticed David. He took one look on him and sneered. "A mere youngster, apple-cheeked and peach-fuzzed." The Philistine ridiculed David. "Am I a dog that you come after me with a stick?" And he cursed him by his gods. "Come on," said the Philistine. "I'll make roadkill of you for the buzzards. I'll turn you into a tasty morsel for the field mice." David answered, "You come at me with a sword and spear and battle axe. I come at you in the name of God of the angel armies, the God of Israel's troops, whom you curse and mock. This very day, God is handing you over to me. I'm about to kill you, cut off your head, and serve up your body and the bodies of your Philistine buddies to the crows and coyotes." Whew, trash talk. "The whole earth will know that there is an extraordinary God in Israel, and everyone gathered here will learn that God does not save by means of sword or spear. The battle belongs to God. He's handing you to us on a platter." That roused the Philistine, and he started towards David. David took off from the front line, running towards the Philistine. David reached inside his pocket for a stone and slung it and hit the Philistine hard in the forehead, embedding the stone deeply. The Philistine crashed forward, face down in the dirt. And that's how David beat the Philistine, with a sling and a stone. He hit him and killed him. No sword for David. Then David ran up to the Philistine and stood over here and pulled the giant's sword from its sheath. Shing! And finished the job by cutting off his head. Chop! That's not in the Bible. Chop. But when the Philistines saw that their great champion was dead, they scattered, running for their lives. What a story, eh? It's one of those stories that has walked off the pages of the Bible and into popular culture. And so you knew where the story was going before I started reading it, didn't you? But think about it for a moment. If you didn't know the end of the story, you would think that the whole situation was pretty dumb. David's brothers did not think that he was that smart or capable. The king didn't think for a moment that David would survive. David's stories about confronting lions and bears sound like he made them up. And if David had been impaled or decapitated by Goliath, it wouldn't have taken anybody by surprise, would it? Nobody goes to fight the biggest, fastest, most fearsome warrior that anybody has ever seen with a sling and 5 smooth stones. Nobody does, except for apparently David. And I don't believe anybody has tried it ever since either. David didn't even try it again. You see, what makes the story incredible is that it happened at all. The truth of the matter is that many of us live in one kind of battlefield or another. We have odds that are stacked so high up against us that sometimes they may look so fearsome and terrifying. We can't see a way out, and we're hoping and praying that somebody or something will come and rescue us. Many of us are like the armies of Israel that day. As much as you're in fighting shape, and you've been through many bloody but victorious battles, you are suddenly faced with an opponent that is so terrifying that nobody in their right mind has dared to step up and challenge him for 40 days. Again, I'll say, it's incredible that this story happened at all. Because when David walks onto that battlefield that day, he's walking with what everyone around him would say is unrealistic confidence. There is a real and present and terrifying danger that is in front of him, and he seems oblivious to it despite the protestations and the terror of the people around him. Where does this swagger come from? Where does this confidence come from? I think David has something that most of us have had beaten out of us through life or the cynicism of other people around us. David has childlike faith. He has the kind of belief that allows him to believe that God can take an idea that seems dumb or improbable to everyone and flip the script with it. David has the kind of faith that allows him to believe that a kid who may not be the biggest or strongest or fastest is exactly the kind of person through whom God can do the impossible. And now, the difficulty with this story is that it is so easy to end at the obvious place. The obvious place is to ask you this afternoon to be more like David. Just be like David. Grab your dumb idea, run onto the battlefield of your life and let it fly. But if you're like me, life has taught you better. If you fight a few battles, you develop a different mentality. If you look at the story of David, in his early years, he was a crazy, bloody warrior. But in his later years, he lost his appetite for war. It'd be so easy for me to say, just be more like David and shut the message down. But I suspect that more than just one of us have more in common with the rest of the army that stayed behind the battle lines. I have a sneaking suspicion that some of us have seen enough battles that we're too smart to run out onto a battlefield with a dumb idea. We want to trust God, but it is easier said than done when you've trusted God with something big and only see it fall apart in the most heartbreaking manner. We want to throw out a dumb idea, but we've been embarrassed before, and we're not going to risk it this time around. This afternoon, I want you to know that I completely understand where you're coming from if this is who you are. I want you to understand that I know what it feels like to strap in every single day as you take the bus to work. You strap in for war. I want you to understand that I really do understand what it feels like to put on your armor every single day because you're going to face bullies at school. I understand what it is like to have a loved one face an incurable health condition and watch their life fade away no matter how hard you tried to pray about it. And you know what the great thing is? God knows too. When Jesus walked this earth as a man, he experienced everything that we experience. In fact, the Bible says this about Jesus. We don't have a high priest who is out of touch with our reality. He's been through weaknesses and testing, experienced it all but the sin. So let's walk right up to him and give what he is so ready to give. Accept the mercy, accept the help. What has helped me to turn a corner is the understanding of this simple fact. I am not responsible for the victory. You are not responsible for the victory. God is. And when you start to shift your perspective in this manner, everything changes a little. Maybe you get your swagger back and walk around with unbridled confidence. Or maybe you take tentative steps forward as you start to rebuild your faith and trust in God. The one thing that I know for sure is that he is always calling us to put something on the line. He's always calling us to risk a little. Sometimes it may not even be big, huge risks. In fact, I find that more often than not, the path forward happens in fits and starts. But I think that when it is all said and done, we can learn a little bit from David this afternoon. I think that we can learn that if we find our childlike place again, we might just dare to trust God with our dumb ideas and watch him do something impossible with our improbable circumstances. I don't know what giants you're facing in your life right now, but I know that you can face them with nothing but a dumb idea and God on your side. This is what God does. He does the impossible with the improbable. He takes the kind of people that would normally be overlooked, and he works through them to change history. He uses the foolish things to shame the wise. So trust him with your life. Trust him with your best laid plans. Trust him with your half-baked ideas, and yes, even your dumb ideas. And watch what he does. One day, you just might find yourself walking onto the battlefield of your life, just like David did, and watch God do the impossible with the improbable in your life. Let's read one last scripture. It's on the back page. 1 Corinthians chapter 1. Take a good look, friends, at who you were when you got called into this life. I don't see many of the brightest and the best among you. Not many influential, not many from high society families. Isn't it obvious that God deliberately chose men and women that the culture overlooks and exploits and abuses, chose those nobodies to expose the hollow pretensions of the somebodies? That makes it quite clear that none of you can get by with blowing your own horn before God. Everything that we have, right thinking and right living, a clean slate and a fresh start, comes from God by way of Jesus Christ. That's why we have the saying, if you're going to blow a horn, blow a trumpet for God. Amen.